as I'm thinking about the story that I'm going to tell you, those really fit, especially the second one, as far as when you allow people to express their light their way, and basically let them have the dignity of their choices. It's great to keep in mind when, whether it's in particular caregiving or just as someone ages, sometimes, well, it's at any age, I think our friends and family have ideas for us that they think would be good or better than ours, or suggestions or opinions about how we should live, or what we should do about a certain condition, or any number of things. So when we allow people the dignity of their choice and their life, and their, to live their life their way. And I'll say the caveat to that is, if someone has cognitive impairment, if they're not thinking clearly, if they're confused in a way that a medical doctor says they're not able to understand the consequences of their behavior, then we have a chance to assist them. But beyond that, the person really has their own choices. Even they can make really bad choices. What looks bad to you and I, but sometimes that is the hardest thing, is just to give them their own choice. Okay, so I'm going to tell you this story that just happened yesterday with a client, and the overall theme is, like I said, assessing, observing differences in people, specifically related to if someone has an infection, are acting different, and then what we can do, and advocating with doctors or a hospital. All right. So the scenario is, I get a call for about a week. This family's reaching out to me. This 91-year-old woman who was living independently had a change of behavior since about, it was like Thanksgiving, but if you're watching this on the recording, it was a couple of weeks ago. She had no real medical conditions before that, no psychiatric conditions, living in an independent community, independent senior community for 17 years, doing fine. So all of a sudden, as they look back, around Thanksgiving or a couple of weeks ago, I'll call her mom. Mom, so it's grandma, great grandma. She's a great grandma, but so we'll call her mom. Mom started, her walking was a little bit more tenuous, so she wasn't as balanced on her feet. She started to be paranoid about the staff. They were stealing things from her, or different acts. She was concerned people were spying on her, so some paranoia going on. She started getting combative with the staff there. She's she's always sort of complaining about something in her normal life, like the food's not good enough, or things weren't always quite right, but she was getting more combative and aggressive. So the family started noticing this, and the staff at the community started noticing this, but mom refused any care. She didn't want to go to the doctor. And so got what turned out to be a urinary tract infection, kept getting worse. It turned into, she was threatening suicide, and she was out of sorts. She didn't know where she was. She kind of had she had a different sense of time. If someone said, "Oh, look at the news," she'd say, "Oh, I saw that news yesterday. I've already seen that." She didn't know exactly where she was. She was what they call oriented times one, meaning she only knew her name. She really didn't know the people around her. So it kept getting worse, until super combative, wanting to, jump off the balcony. And they're like, "Okay, we need to bring the paramedics in." She was making a big fight with them. They had to restrain her, bring her to the hospital, and check her for what was going on. Now, she arrives at the hospital, and she's just a blank slate to the hospital staff. And I'm using this as an example because this happens a lot, not just she, but everybody that goes to the hospital. They're just like, okay, what's presenting right now? That's all the staff knows. They didn't know she's a 91-year-old with that 2 weeks ago she was living independently, no cognitive impairment, absolutely fine, and now she's got all these symptoms. So the family did go with her to the hospital and tell the staff what was going on. So they immediately found out that a urinary tract infection is an easy urine sample test that you can find out if someone has a UTI. But sometimes it takes a couple days to find out the exact strain, so they can dial in with the antibiotic, but they can start an antibiotic, a general antibiotic, very quickly. And so they started her on the course of the antibiotic, checked her she was admitted to the hospital. So she started to get better, but she was still agitated, especially at night, kind of giving the staff there a lot of pushback. So they put her on more medication. The hospitalist there started her on an antipsychotic medication, which you would give someone maybe with schizophrenia, or certain psychotic symptoms, but not necessarily a 91-year-old, otherwise healthy, who's never had any cognitive impairment before. They also started her on some medication to calm her down, some Ativan, Haldol, to make her more cooperative with the staff. Okay. So she's there about a week, and I showed up yesterday, so this would be about a week. The amazing thing is I showed up right at the time this new psychiatrist came to see her. So the new psychiatrist was in the room. I show up, and that psychiatrist is specialized. She doesn't specialize in geriatrics, but because this hospital has so many geriatric clients, she sees delirium a lot. So this psychiatrist says, well, the doctor that's been seeing mom for a week wants mom to go from the hospital to be discharged into an inpatient psychiatric unit, and then work with her medications to handle it psychiatrically. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen a inpatient locked psych unit, but it's pretty cold and depressing. And there's certainly not going to be, otherwise healthy 91-year-olds there. So it would have been just a really horrible road to go down. And this regular doctor at the hospital was saying, well, I have 8 other people right now, 8 other older people in the hospital right now with urinary tract infections, and none of them are presenting like this. They're all just calm, laying in their bed, and without the behavioral issues. So therefore, he based that information on what he was giving this woman and what he was suggesting for this woman. Even though the family told me a week ago, they said we were doing research and found that these behaviors are often coinciding with a urinary tract infection. They can affect you mentally and cause behaviors like this. And the doctor said, absolutely not. I've got these other people, and none of them are presenting like this. So then he put her on this psychiatric medication. And she just finished the round of antibiotics, and she's still having a little bit of symptoms. She's still a little bit paranoid, and she's still, like, at night, she's having trouble. What's happened is that this new psychiatrist said the medication he put her on, one of the side effects is urinary retention. So when she's urinating, she's not getting rid of all the urine. So therefore, she still has the effects of the infection because of the results of this medication. And so she was in the room, and oh my gosh, this is a miracle that we're here at the same time. And she is speaking my language. And so she said, I disagree with the other doctor. We're going to take her off the psychiatric medication. and we need to get her moving, and we need to get her sleeping so she can get this out of her system. That that she was explaining that as we age, our cognitive load decreases, so that if a 20, 30, 40-year-old gets a urinary tract infection, it might affect us, but it's not going to cause so much confusion because we have room to kind of buffer the effects of the infection. But as we age, maybe there's, however you see it or hear it, there's less ability for us to just bounce back right away, or, to kind of get knocked over by it. So that's why, like, a urinary tract infection or dehydration in older adults can really impact people with these symptoms that look like full-blown dementia or psychosis, but it's only delirium. So if something happens that comes on right away, for her, it was slow, meaning it was maybe over a week, it got worse. So that's slow. If it's Alzheimer's or dementia, usually it's years long. Or if it's just caused by a stroke, that would happen right away, and it would, the dementia or the memory loss would happen right away. But something like an infection, it's like if someone's acting really differently right away, then it's usually it's an infection, sometimes a stroke. But like an Alzheimer's, dementia would be a slow onset, like years in the making. So when I got there was like 5 family members, 2 that had driven into from Colorado to California because they were so concerned. They heard all week from the doctors and the nurses how mom was acting. It was just off the charts. They thought it was just so unusual that they had to come in to find out what's going on. So they were all there, and we talked to the psychiatrist, and then I was explaining to them what was going on. And so they were super relieved, and then could plan, okay, so now what do we want to do for mom as she's getting better? She needs a couple more days for this infection to get out of the system. But now, because of the way she acted when she left, she was really agitated with the paramedics, and she made kind of she was embarrassed by her behavior when she left. And she's like, I can't go back there after living there so long. So now we're looking for a new place that would be appropriate for her if she wants to move or go back. So she'll have some options, but she's certainly not going to an inpatient psychiatric facility. So when we talk about, lately we've been talking about, or the last couple of weeks we talked about, going home for or seeing family or friends for the holidays is more of a time that we see people. I, as a care manager, would get a lot of calls during the holidays because that's when maybe if you haven't seen a friend or family for a year, sometimes people just get together once a year and they see someone like, oh my gosh, you are so different, and they get worried about the changes. So when we assess/observe, right, it's a loving observation. So when we go to someone, we see someone that we haven't seen for a while, things to look for or to keep in mind. Are they repeating their stories more than usual? Like that would point to their short-term memory. That could be a dementia, that could be the lead up to an infection or getting worse. How is their mood? How is their walking? Are they walking straight? Are they lifting their toes? Sometimes their toes start dragging. Are they going to the restroom more or less than usual? What's interesting is when the family looks back, they said, we gave her a ride home after Thanksgiving, and usually she would have gone to the bathroom right before we left and right after she got home, but she didn't have to go. But they didn't really think about it at the time. But when they thought back, they're like, oh, that was another sign of this infection. And one thing with urinary tract infections, as we get older, most of the time people can't feel it. Sometimes when we're younger, sometimes maybe there's a burning when we urinate or some kind of feeling. Like I just don't feel feel well. But with older people, they don't usually have any sensations like that. So it's really, we know because of the symptoms. Um, so mood, walking, patterns of urination or bowel movements, any kind of changes like that. Or maybe you see their, if you go to their home, for example, maybe they've always been very neat and it's messier than usual. Uh, Sometimes I'll go to a place that, or a home of someone that I knew in their usual state, they would always put things back if they were involved in a project. But if they left things on the table or maybe drawers undone or just the, you could tell they don't have the energy anymore to complete the whole step. And that was it. And that may be a change. Now, if you go to my house, that might not be. I may have a pile of a project in progress, but that's normal for me. So you're looking for little things that are not quite normal. And then if it's little things, you might just keep that to yourself and go, oh, I'm going to pay attention. Maybe that's one little flag. You could talk to the person about it. They may or may not want to talk about it or be aware of it. But also if there's other people involved, so their family members, friends, sometimes you can, you start comparing notes like, yeah, I was over at Mike's yesterday and I noticed this. And they're like, oh, well, I noticed this last week when I helped him I took him to the doctor and they, so if you start kind of comparing notes, it's not gossiping, but at a certain age, people tend to get more of a care team around them that kind of notice and look out for them. So with this woman now, the family now knows, and we're talking about symptoms that would start that they could get and what they can do about it earlier. So it doesn't lead to the psychosis that it did this time. So they notice little changes. And even mom was different. Like usually, she didn't urinate before and after the trip. She started to get a little more agitated. And she was even a little kinder than usual. She's like, oh, thank you for your patience. And they were like, that's not really something mom would say. So now that they could see it in retrospect, next time they could look ahead and go, okay, so these are the symptoms. It looks like this is what mom could lead to an infection with mom. And then what to do about it. So that would be important to have a relationship with a doctor that could either, if it's significant enough, sometimes they will just prescribe, if the person's not well enough to get to the doctor's office or there's not an appointment set up quickly, sometimes they'll prescribe something that like, look, I know Jane is apt to get a urinary tract infection. We'll prescribe this antibiotic. Sometimes you can just bring a urine sample into the doctor so the person doesn't have to go all the way there to themselves. Sometimes in assisted livings or senior communities, they've got doctors that will go to the apartment or to that place. So somehow to get their urine to a lab testing and then someone who could write a prescription. So it looks different in different venues or where the person lives. But just that alone, the observing, noticing changes and then doing something about it can help the escalation. So it doesn't end up, in the hospital or if it, into a worse situation. I was going to say one other thing about that, and I don't remember right this second. So that's what I have to share with you today. And I'd say just, as we go into these holidays or any time of year really, but specifically nowadays, just lovingly keep an eye on people, from a friendly, that's what I was going to say, friendly point of view, or perspective. So the quote about giving people the dignity of their life. So I went in and talked to mom and I was asking her, like, did you feel any different with this event? How'd that feel? And she did not want to talk about it. She said nothing happened. So I didn't press it. I know what happened. The doctor knows what happened. The kids know what happened. And she had no intention of talking about it. It was a real hit to her pride. And 92, right? She's been trucking along, being independent. She's got an image to the world and her kids of what she's like. And that's very important to her. And um, she thought it was ridiculous that the paramedics were doing what they were doing, and she was telling them what she wanted, and that's how it is. So, okay. So then when I went out to talk to the family, the family earlier, when I was meeting with them and the psychiatrist and mom, they were trying to kind of correct what mom was saying and adding in details. And mom, you remember this happened, and it happened this way, and you felt that way. And it was really funny. It was a great example. So I walk in the room and I sit there, and the kids are on either side of me, and she's right in front of me. And they start saying like, well, mom, remember this happened. And she didn't want anything to do with that. So she did this. She looked right at me and she said this. She goes, and the kids are like, what? And she's like, I only want to talk to Cheryl. Because before that, she was like rolling her eyes at what the doctor was saying and what the kids were saying. And she was a great character. But I was there to give her what she wanted. I didn't need her to say uncle, like, yes, this happened and I had an infection, all this stuff. I just let her do what she did. And I was there to work, with her, because I talked to her about some straightforward things after the family left. And but I was really there to give her what she wanted. So I was her advocate. And then when I talked to the family later, they're like, well, what should we do? Like um, it's sort of like they wanted to talk about it to somehow make it right, or connect with her. There were reasons that they wanted to talk to her about what happened. And I offered like, well, what if they said she's making the two kids out to be the evil ones now. They're against her. And, like, well, it's been a real crack in her ego, her pride, and the image. She never saw you vulnerable. She never let you see her vulnerable like that before. And so she doesn't want to talk about it. What if you just start talking to her like you did 2 weeks ago before any of this happened, and you just forget it happened? And like, that's what we were thinking. And it's like, give her the dignity of her process in her life. If she doesn't want to talk about it, let it go. And we can work on getting her back to a place that she wants. If she wants to move to another place, she's not going to be able to do that on her own. We're going to help her, but we don't have to talk about the event. So anyway, that was a great example of all of this, and wanted to share about this, and also being your own advocate when you're at the hospital. Advocate for loved ones. Sometimes you've got to ask for a second opinion if you don't agree with what the doctor's saying. Just because a doctor says it doesn't mean that's the answer. Sometimes you got to get a couple more opinions or get an advocate in there with you. So that's what I got. And so love to open up the floor, whatever you want to talk about. John.
Yeah, I wanted to start. There were three things, hopefully pretty quick. I wanted to start with just appreciating, Cheryl, the 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 piece about that you opened with about getting people what they want, and you kind of closed with that too. With like, hey, if you want to go to a new place, it's great, and no, you don't have to talk about what happened. I just think that was so wise, and I had something happen last night where I had somebody telling me something that like they were drawing a conclusion, like the moral of this story is, and I was like, no, it's more nuanced than that, and I don't even know what it is. I just want to process it. And I at some point they kept pushing on it, and I just said, that's an infliction. I said, please stop. And, but what it did was it was really wonderful because it gave me this compassion. It made me think like, you know, my rage against the machine mode and like tell people things that they haven't asked for, or whatever, that is, or maybe more than they asked for. And so that was really educational for me. And I, I had a question, like maybe I think my mind probably wandered, not because you aren't scintillating. It's just I, it's my character flaw, but one of them. But anyway, I was, what was how did they get from where they were to, I know you were the catalyst, but it sounded like what you said or what I picked up was that they went from the doctor that just, was using his case study of 8 patients to say, absolutely not. I won't even Google that, to this. I think, wasn't it the psychiatrist that had a different point of view? Is that accurate?
Yes.
And how did they get to the psychiatrist, like in the context of that hospital environment?
That's a good question. Um, what's interesting is this particular psychiatrist is only there once a week, it turns out, on Mondays. But she was in from the following or the previous Monday. So it may have been I'm surprised they hadn't called in a psychiatrist before during the week, potentially. Or it seemed like, and so I don't have the piece, but what I'm imagining would happen in a situation like that is if the general doctor, the hospitalist, so this hospitalist is usually hospitalists are there on call at the hospital for about a week. So whatever clients are there during their week on, and then there's another week on or another doctor. So he's covering, and if he's suggesting to place her at a psychiatric inpatient, that may take a psychiatrist referral or involvement regarding that step. So that may have been the flag to get that psychiatrist involved. It certainly was the family was not driving they weren't driving the care at that point, meaning they were just sitting back, finding out what the doctors wanted and the nurses. They were on the receiving end. One of the daughter-in-laws was researching behind the scenes and they had their own thoughts, but they were really just receiving. So something triggered it that the psychiatrist got involved in. I'm not sure exactly what it was.
Can you hold on to her?
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, that's just that's a wonderful story. And I asked permission here to share something which I was given. And I just, this is just like a little tidbit if it's useful to anyone, hopefully not counter to what I just got through saying before that. But specifically like with UTI, it's something we've dealt with a lot. And Jeff Kelber, our wonderful one of Brian and Jeff team that treat the MSI staff as a active gift of service, and I just he's worked with us and he works with us over the phone, which is nice up here on Mount Baldy. But just like there were a couple things that are just real simple and inexpensive. One of them is actually a food spice, so it was just like real simple and very effective. And if I thought that we had to do antibiotics for as long as we've been doing these things, I think we would have ended up in a very antibiotic resistant state, which I don't think is desirable. So anyway, I just mentioned that as these are like kind of like food level things that you could just do on an ongoing basis and feel great. Anyway, just mention that if that's of interest to anyone.
Yeah, it's great. I'm glad you mentioned that. I do not I don't love antibiotics unless they're needed, and certainly multiple doses of antibiotics can be very difficult on the gut. The other thing I've been reading about lately, so older women are more prone to urinary tract infections, and I've been reading lately that vaginal estrogen is this one female urologist, just says that has cured more UTIs than any antibiotics. So this is something that some people can take regularly to avoid UTIs. Yeah. So there are natural things that people can try.
Gotta hang on to some things.
Yeah.
And I mentioned Jeff because and I intentionally didn't mention what the two herbs were. I mean, if anybody wanted to know, I'd tell them, of course. But because what Jeff does is he's got like a whole laundry list of things that he knows have been helpful, but he's testing, and I've just found his testing to be very accurate because I did DSS and I do CKT on myself, and I get answers that don't necessarily work for me sometimes. And that's when like Jeff will do his NOT work, whatever he does, and then check me. And then I recheck myself and I get the same answer he did, which is the opposite of the answer I had. So it's whatever it is. He's like my go-to guy for recalibrating myself when I get off beam. Anyway, I'll stop at
I appreciate
that.
that. All right. Thanks for sharing. Hey, Peggy.
Hi. I've actually had direct experience with what you're talking about with my mom when she was in assisted living. And you have to know, my mom was just the sweetest person that you'd want to meet, doesn't make waves. And one night at 2 a.m, I get a call from the assisted living center, and they said, "We need you to come down here. Your mom just tried to stab the nurses with some scissors." I'd had no experience of what was going on. So I get down there and the nurses are standing outside the closed door of my mom's unit. And they said, "We can't go in. We had to call the PET team," which is essentially a psychiatric
evaluation.
Thank you. They're like a psychiatric paramedic. So I walk into my mom's room, which is totally dark. She's sitting by the window, just looking out. And I said, "Hi, Mom, what's happening?" She wouldn't say a thing to me, which is very unusual. And so the bottom line is they took her to UCLA, and indeed it was a UTI. And so I learned something there that I didn't know. And when we got back to assisted living, the nurse was talking to me and she said, "Oh, yes." She said, "That is sometimes one of the first symptoms that will show up is that a senior, an elder, will all of a sudden present themselves as very psychotic." And so I learned something that day. And I also learned, you brought up a couple of points that I wrote down that I found important too. Is obviously one is to be her advocate, which I had been for many years, because by this time I'd been caring for her and looking out for her well-being for about 10 years. So being an advocate, definitely. And also what you said was listening to the person and not trying to correct them or correct what they're saying, or the "don't you remember." It's really, I found, loving them right where they are and listening very carefully to what they're saying or not saying. And I found this and learned this over the 10 years with Mom, is things change, as they get older. And I guess what I want to really say, to summarize it, is loving them where they are, paying attention, and seeking the help that they need. and being very conscious of what we're being told what to do. And Cheryl, you brought that up also. So that's what I have to share.
Thanks, Peggy. I appreciate your direct experience. Yeah, and one thing when I was talking to her, the mom, saying, do you want to go back to the place you were living? And she's like, no. And she was saying, now, well, I don't think I was supposed to say that because it just dropped out of my mind. So I'll just leave it as that. Okay, Nancy.
Hi, everybody. So I live in an assisted living facility, as some of you may know. And I'm very grateful for Cheryl's support in just exactly the ways that we're talking about at the beginning, a little over 2 years ago when I had a situation in which I put myself in the emergency room. But in rethinking it, I wonder if that was the smartest thing to do. But I could have talked to Cheryl a day earlier and maybe made a different choice. Anyway, the main thing I wanted to say is in my assisted living facility here, there's a big sign, framed sign on the wall with the name and phone number of the ombudsman that is on call for here. And I think ombudsmen are available in hospitals as well. And I'm thinking about the patients whose children aren't nearby or who have no advocate, to whom being hospitalized or for whatever reason must be dumbfounding. It's like, now what do I do? And there is somebody that is supposed to be an advocate called an ombudsman. It's just a fancy Finnish name, I think, or something. But they are supposed to be the advocates for people who need the support. So just to say it.
That's
I
right.
think
That's a great point. There are ombudsmen in nursing homes and hospitals and assisted living, so things that are licensed through the state. And if you're in a hospital or a nursing home and you're on Medicare, there's also in each state, there's a quality assurance board that's in charge of the state. So if someone's in a hospital, they don't think they're getting the treatment that they need, or they're getting discharged too early, someone can what's called appeal the discharge. And so as soon as you say that to the staff, they know what you're talking about, and it'll usually slow things down a little bit and add some them thinking it through a little bit more. But if you need to appeal it, you call the Quality Control Board, and that's Googleable in your state. So Medicare Quality Improvement, and you call them and say, I'm going to appeal the discharge, or I don't feel like I'm getting the care that I need, and they send it to their they take care of it as far as it's like a double check, a second opinion. It's like an outside review board, and then they get back to you in the hospital to say, no, we agree with them or we don't agree with them. And so that's another level in addition to the ombudsman. The ombudsmen are usually volunteers. Sometimes they're paid, and they will come into the hospital if you need to, or the nursing home. That will help. And then there's professionals like myself. There's a national organization of geriatric care managers that can assist you in being an advocate if someone's in the hospital or at home or in need. That website is aginglifecare.org, aginglifecare.org, and you can put in the zip code of where you need help, and professionals in that area will come up. Those professionals are not usually covered by Medicare. It's usually private pay, but they can be extremely helpful. Like this family that I helped yesterday, I mean, really, with the psychiatrist, the help of the psychiatrist really will change the trajectory of this woman's life. If she would have gone into a psych unit, I mean, some people, if it's in a bad situation, they end up dying early because they don't want, it's just horrible. The situation or the environment they're in is horrible. Their health can decline, so many things. So getting a professional involved can save time, money, people's health, can save stress, etc. And I'll say one thing Nancy brought up as far as, you know, when to call the when to call the paramedics, when to make that decision. And it's what we talked about is giving the person that's experiencing it the dignity of their own choice. So with some people, if they are still thinking clearly, you know, with an infection, sometimes it gets to the point that someone's not thinking clearly, and you do need to advocate on their behalf and go like, no, we are calling the PET team or the psychiatric evaluation team and deciding, do we need to bring you in without your consent, right? But other than that, the people have the right to make their own decision. So if someone's kind of struggling and like, oh, I think I need help, but I'm not sure. I think I need help, but I'm still not sure. I think I need help, but I'm not sure. I find that if I were to assist them too early before they said it was their choice, then they may not learn the lesson that they needed to learn. Or if they go, hey, if maybe that person ends up in the hospital and then to assisted living, they never get to go back home, they might resent me forever. They go, well, Cheryl put me into this hospital and I didn't think I needed to go. If I could just have been there a couple more days, I could have made it. It's all because of you. But if I let them, if I give them the support and go, if you end up in the hospital, here's the support you need, just let me know. And it's their choice, then they will forever know I did everything I could to stay at home. I did everything I possibly could. And I find that that's how most people want to live. They want to do it their way for as long as they possibly can. And some people, I've seen people, you know, can't get off the sofa. And before that, they're like hobbling along, they're using a cane and then a walker. And then they're just like, you know, if you see their home, they're just like struggling to get around their own home. And, you know, I look at them, well, that's amazing. You have so much tenacity that you're able to just do it, you know, and make it work. And then finally that, you know, that something happens, like, okay, they go like, okay, I cannot do that anymore. Sometimes it's, I cannot get up. That is that's, you know, a big loss of independence and change of what they're able to do when the person can just not sit to stand. Another advertisement for keep those muscles moving, do a couple extra squats every time you go to the bathroom, keep moving. So giving people the dignity of their process, letting them do it their way I think it's a decision that will change the course of their life because they knew it, they did it their way. And it may have looked, you know, like they're scraping by sometimes, or they're going down in flames, but they did it their way. You know, and I also ask people sometimes, are you okay dying trying? And if their answer is yes, then we do it that way. So I personally love that. There's a lot of freedom. It takes it away from like, well, it shouldn't look a certain way. If mom and dad will just get to the senior center and eat more greens and have acupuncture, then their life could be so much better. And you talk to mom and dad, they're like, I don't want to go to the senior center. That's dumb. I've never been to the senior center. And I don't want to take greens. I want to eat mac and cheese and, you know, whatever, microwave dinners. That's what I really want. I'm like, great, let's get you that. So dignity of their process of their life. Anybody else have anything they want to share? A few more minutes. about Sodhi?
Hi.
Hi.
It seems to make a lot of sense what you're saying. I'm just wondering whether any of this information is only for MSIA people. Because my sister and I are twins, and my sister has got different conditions, and I'm concerned about her. And her children have a tendency to make assumptions what's good for her and stuff. I'm just wondering whether these kind of recordings I can let them have so the children are more aware.
Absolutely. It's a great question. And these are universal themes, and the recordings are available. I believe they're public. They're set to public. So if you go to heartfelt.org and look up under resources and go down to navigating aging, and then under the navigating aging page, the recording should be there. They're up on YouTube. So you're welcome to share them. And the only thing that's, MSI specific is how we, do a centering and say a prayer at the beginning. But really all this, so the information is available and really valuable to everybody. So you're welcome to share.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. John, did you have something else?
Oh,
Yeah,
no,
I just wanted
Go
to,
ahead.
oh, you want to let Maritza go first? That's
No, if you got something quick. Either way.
yeah. So I just wanted to, I was just hearing as you were sharing your last piece, Cheryl, which I just resonated with every word you said. I was hearing Frank Sinatra singing, "I Did It My Way."
I did it
And,
my way.
Yeah. Eat your effing mac and cheese and enjoy your dying days, and that's coming from what many people might see as a food fanatic. But I just, the other thing is I wanted to just underline that ombudsman piece. I mean, we've done so many things for absolutely free because we just didn't have money for attorneys, and we just when Kamala Harris was our vice president was Attorney General of California, and they told us they said, well, Lori's qualified for total permanent disability, SSDI, so we'll automatically forgive her student loans, which were a lot, and for the federal loans, but for the privately held loans called Sallie Mae, it was like, there is no forgiveness for those. You just roll over. You can't even do bankruptcy. You're screwed. And so I just called Kamala Harris's office, and they said, "Oh yeah, in fact, we're looking at doing a class action suit against Sallie Mae. Maybe Lori will be our case study, our example of how abusive these lending practices are." It was just like, who knew? And then what actually happened was they just said, you go on this website that, of course, Sallie Mae will never tell you about, and you just fill in these little blanks. It's called filing a case, and just as soon as you do that, Sallie Mae, they don't argue about it. They automatically send you the form for the loan forgiveness that doesn't exist. And so all of her loans were forgiven. I just telling people I had a similar thing by calling the IRS when I had IRS debt for a variety of reasons.
She's watching.
Pennies on the dollar.
Don't
These things
worry.
are available through the government agencies. You don't even need a fancy attorney or a fancy specialist, unless of course that's Cheryl, then you need her, but I'm just saying there's so much you can do for free. And if anybody wants to know, just contact me. Anyway.
Great idea. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Those are great ideas. Yep. Maritza.
Oh, thank you. I want to thank you. I learned so much at these calls, and I had my family member come in this week to our home, and he has been diagnosed with diabetic. He's some kind of a same age group, I'll say, so, and he's not somebody that's would say takes care of his nutrition or anything like that, but he showed up at our home like midday, and they hadn't even had breakfast. It's like, I'm freaking out. I'm saying, this guy, I don't know. I don't know anything about diabetes, but I'm saying that's probably the worst thing you can do. I'll make you breakfast. It's like, it's urgent. And part of what it was is I saw him really lethargic, and I thought this guy could pass out any moment, you know. And anyway, I am, you know, try to hint at him. I said, "Have you been gone to see a nutritionist because this is new, or are you getting the monitor or what?" So he said, "Yeah, I have an appointment," but I could see that in his demeanor, there's no urgency whatsoever at all. You know, he was, you know, I did ask him specifically what he would eat, you know, or not eat or whatever, and he was cautious what he was eating. So that was a good sign, even for somebody who's never really watched anything that he eats.
Mhm.
But at the same time, at some point, he left and went out to the local here, a couple of blocks with some market, and apparently got some junk food anyway. You know, so who knows? So there is that part of me that sometimes wants to, you know, impose my nutritional habits amongst to other people that are just not open to this at all. The idea of taking care of themselves, and I have to, you know, take a deep breath, and it's like, okay, I need to just keep. I can make some suggestions, but in the end, it's their choice. You know, in particular, is somebody who's a grown person, they're in their, you know, 60s, going to 70 or whatever, and you know, I need to just respect that. Might not be what I'd like for them, might be somebody I care for a great deal, but I need to just allow them their space to be in charge of their own care, of their own health and their own life, you know. So very interesting. It's a good lesson.
Yeah, it's a great lesson. It's a great example. And you know, I'll balance that with, there are times that, you know, someone has a cure for something or something that's worked for them, and I find out much later, they're like, I was like, man, why didn't you tell me? I would have liked that information. So we can offer or kind of test the waters to see if the person's interested. You know, it's like, hey, have you ever thought about, you know, doing something different? Would you like to, you know, have you heard of anything, or have you do any research, or, you know, gently say something, and you'll find out really quick. Just like my example of this mom patient the other day, like, you know, what about this? And she was like, nothing happened. So I knew that topic was off the table. But if you know, if you have a relationship with someone, I go, oh, you know, I've had some good luck. You know, if you're ever interested, let me know. So you could make the offer, the invitation, if that's called in your heart. Because I'm just someone that if I learn something that works, I like to share it with people that want to know. If they don't need to know, I don't need them to do something. But I think because it's always been important when people share things, like when you all share things and you teach me, I love that. I want to know, because then I could teach other people, I could help other people. So that's just how I work. But you know, and hopefully, you know, other areas too, but especially with people's nutrition, and it seems like especially around diabetes, people make their own choices with that, and they manage or don't manage, and they just do the best they can. You know, a lot of people with diabetes, they're fine just taking medication. I'll just eat more sugar and just, you know, take more insulin. I've had nurses tell me that. I've had doctors teach patients, you know, newly diagnosed patients, oh, just take that medication, then I'll teach you how to cheat. So it's you know, especially if you love someone, you're like, oh, you know, I've seen someone get their, you know, toes amputated or foot amputated because of diabetes. So like, you don't really want that for them, but they're going to do it their way. And, you know, if they've got diabetes and they're a grown adult, that most likely they've had all kind of education and all kind of choices, and they've found a way that they want to do it. So, yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
The other question I had was, in terms of forms, I was looking at my, we did the whole thing of the, what is it, living trust, along with all the forms of the end of life things. And, but this was done, God, I'm thinking like 15 years ago or something like that. do you think it's important to update those forms? Has the language changed much? I mean, I was looking at them and they're all legalese and things. It's different than the one that the website Hartford provides. So, you know, I wanted to hear your feedback on that.
Well, the trust is going to be different than a living will. Like a living will says what kind of things what kind of treatment a person does or doesn't want at the end of their life. So that's the living will. And a
There
trust.
is that in there. The living will is the one I'm talking about part.
Okay. Sometimes there are newer versions that come out, but typically the older versions still work. And I'd have to check into that specifically before I give you an exact answer as far as like, okay, that form is expired. But I've never had that question as far as if a client had an older power of attorney and they give it to a doctor. I haven't had a doctor say, oh, that form is not good anymore. If someone's doing their paperwork now, you'd want to use the newest form. That said, so whether the form itself expires, probably not, but check that out. But secondly, I would suggest all your forms, you just look over, like once a year, you just look over them and read what you wrote and see if it's still true. You know, so sometimes when there's small kids involved, for example, and you do a living will and a trust, and you say, okay, if something happens to me, I want Barbara to take care of my kids. Well, then a couple years later, you're not really friends with Barbara anymore. And so you want Mike to take care of them. So when you look at every year, you might not think about, oh yeah, I forgot that Barbara's even in there, because you wrote it down like some theory, in theory, if something happened, but so you wouldn't think about it all the time. But when you go over your paperwork, you realize, oh, I realized relationships have shifted, or that person that you put as your power of attorney, the agent and power of attorney to speak for you on your healthcare decisions since then, maybe you've seen them make some poor decisions that you're like, I'm not really in alignment with them anymore, and I don't want them handling my healthcare decisions. So then you you create new documents and change them. So that would be more of the value that I would see in looking over the paperwork. And if it's a significant estate, as far as a trust is, if it's a significant estate, it would probably be well worth your money to every, I don't know, 5 years maybe, to just run it by your lawyer to go, look, can you just give this a once over to make sure everything's in place? That's what I would say about that.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Sure. Thank you. Hi, Sylvie.
I think Sodi just never put her hand down the last time.
So if you're there, you can ask a question. If not, we'll go to Peggy, and then Sylvie, let us know if you still have a question. Hey, Peggy.
Hi, I just want to add for Maritza what you were asking. To me, the most important thing is that, and you'll need to check this out, that a will needs to be witnessed by two people. And in my experience, the most important thing is, like, if you change, your will, or you want to update what's in it, you may want to consider making it more legal by having it witnessed and then notarized, because that will include the date. So if there is any like contesting of your will, like, is it the newest generation or the newest update, you will have those dated and notarized. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, that's great information. And that's a good point. Sometimes people change their trust over time and change things. And I just had seen this recently where someone had, it was a couple and they did a trust. And so then they had a trust for the person who was still alive. And then then they had a separate trust for the person who passed. And then there were stepkids involved and non-stepkids. So it was complicated. And the person had like 7 different changes, but they didn't really have the papers very well organized. So if someone, something happened to the spouse that is still alive, and the kids go to the drawers and find this paperwork, like they'd find all these different iterations of this document. Some had the stepkids completely out of the trust. If they were on the outs with parents, out of the trust, not getting nothing. And then, the next iteration is like, oh, you know what? I want to put them back in the trust. So they be back in. So depending on which document it was pulled out could get complicated, right? So when I was asked to get involved, the first thing I said was, I need you to take all these documents and go to your lawyer and have an updated version. So then so we know, first of all, it's what you want now. And secondly, that it has the newest date. And then we know that document, the newest document, is the valid one. So all the other ones aren't valid anymore. They're a part of it because with trusts, the name of the trust is the same, but then the date can get changed, of the document. So it can get complicated, but it's a favor to the people who are left behind, or if you're the one handling a trust, that that you're going to have access to the newest version. So that it's your most updated of your wishes.
Can I
All
add,
right.
can I add one more thing?
Okay.
Just on what you're saying, like I personally have a trust, I've made 4 changes to it. And what they call it is a restatement of the trust. And then they put the date. So the trust remains the same. It's just each restatement gives the updated information. And I can tell you firsthand from being a trustee for someone's estate and doing my own, that banks in particular, they are very specific about, how a trust is worded and all of those things. So if the documents you have are not like notarized in the perfect way, or it can have, implications. So I agree with Cheryl, and it's certainly been my personal experience that if you have questions, to consult an estate attorney, because that's their job. That's what they focus on, and make sure that a person's documents are all in order, properly notarized, properly witnessed, so that when it comes time, either for you handling someone else's estate or someone handling yours, everything's in order. It makes a big difference. And I'm speaking personally about that.
Mhm.
So that's
Mhm.
what I have to say.
No, thanks for sharing that, Peggy. Peggy's not only a trained fiduciary, but she also has, experiences firsthand of handling families' estates like that. So yes, banks can be very specific with what they need. And it's also important to get a good trust attorney, right? Don't buy something for $5 off the internet, because documents and wording does need to be accurate, and specific notarizations and things like that to make it valuable. So it doesn't, estates don't have to go into probate and things like that. So anyway, excellent. Thank you all for joining us today. I love our family. Be well, and hope to see you next time.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank
All
you,
right.
guys. Good seeing you.
Yeah. Nice to see
Seeing you all.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thanks, everyone.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.